Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central alongside EJ Smith. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from Lincoln Financial Field, getting set for the Eagles' regular season finale against the New York Giants. EJ, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Olivia. It feels like just yesterday. Obviously, it feels like just yesterday that we were in Sao Paulo, Brazil, for the regular season opener. I'm mostly joking. I feel like it feels like a year or change. It really has. It feels like forever ago that we were there, but we have made it to the end of the regular season, and yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for the game. It's not necessarily maybe the game that we envisioned at the beginning of the year, but I do think that there's a lot to be excited about, especially the show. So yeah, no, I'm excited to get started.
The playoffs are on the way. However, one last game to watch. We've got lots to discuss. Before we get into it, as always, you can be a part of our conversation. You can head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day if you're not already over there. Leave us a question, a comment. We will be answering some of those toward the end of our show today. Plus, we'll also be interacting with you all throughout the game in real time. So we look forward to seeing you over there in just a little bit. EJ, there is a long list of inactives for the Eagles, as Nick Sirianni said earlier in the week that he's going to rest a handful of guys for today's game with the number 2 seed in the NFC lockdown for the playoffs. This is essentially, in terms of the outcome of this game, a meaningless game for the Eagles. With that in mind, Jalen Hurts is out for today's game, as we already knew. However, if he was healthy, he wouldn't be playing. But the fact of the matter is that he is still in concussion protocol. He initially sustained the concussion a few weeks ago against the Washington Commanders, missed last week's game, and now he is inactive once again and continues to be in concussion protocol. We have not seen him at practice. He has not participated in any capacity. How concerned are you about his availability for this upcoming wild card game next week?
Yeah, I think that it's a little too early to really tell if he's going to be available, for the duration of the week or when he might be able to come back. But I do think that it's fair to say, his concussion at least is not categorized as one of the more mild ones, because I think it's important to note that Will Shipley suffered a concussion against the Commanders as well, and he's already back from that concussion. So yeah, I do think that the timeline suggests that this has maybe been a longer term recovery process for him, but I do think it's important to remember that he wasn't going to play this week, as you mentioned. So I think it really comes down to, is he going to be available at the start of the practice week when the Eagles reconvene after this, after the regular season finale? I think that if he comes back on Wednesday, and even if it's in a limited capacity, I think that will probably put this story to bed. But I do think that it's kind of, I'd say, eyebrow raising at this point that he hasn't been able to return yet. I mean, concussions are, unique in nature. So I understand that it's hard to speculate on those things. You'll hear Nick Sirianni doesn't give a lot of information when asked about Jalen Hurts' status. So yeah, again, I think it's important to remember, like Will Shipley, like I said, there are people who would have been able to return more quickly. So I think that it speaks to the severity of the concussion, but we really just don't know enough yet, going into the next week. I think that's when we'll learn a lot more.
All eyes will be on that Wednesday practice to see if Jalen Hurts is able to get back on the field in some capacity. All right, Hurts is not the only Eagles player who is inactive for today's game. There's a long list of players who will not suit up, including Saquan Barkley, Zach Bond, A.J. Brown, Jalen Carter, Nakobe Dean, Landon Dickerson, Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, Darius Slay, and Devontae Smith. I need to take a deep breath after getting through all of those inactives. Of course, the most notable name on that list, there's a bunch of notable names, but Saquon Barkley, of course, is not active for today's game. He will not have the opportunity to try and break Eric Dickerson's single season rushing yards record. That is not news as of today. This was something that we knew going into today's game, as Sirianni, when he spoke to the media on Wednesday, made that official and put a bunch of speculation to bed. Now, Barkley was just 101 rushing yards away from breaking Dickerson's record, which was set over 40 years ago now at this point. It has been standing since 1984. EJ, how did Saquon take this news when he found out that he wasn't going to have this opportunity to play today?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that he was mildly disappointed, but also relieved. I think it would probably be the best way to summarize his thoughts. He said that, after last Sunday's game, he went to sleep thinking that he didn't really want to pursue the record. He didn't want to play in the regular season finale if there wasn't anything on the line for the team. But he said when he woke up the next day, he started to feel more like this is his opportunity this was an opportunity for him to put his name in NFL history, and started to feel like he did want to pursue the record. So I do think it's important to mention also that he said like his body doesn't feel like he just ran for 2,000 yards. He doesn't feel like he has the league high 374 touches going into the final week of the regular season. He's had a heavy workload, but he doesn't seem like he's necessarily feeling that heavy workload. So I think he felt ready to go out here and pursue the record. But I think the other part that he really harped on was like, it wasn't going to just be him playing in this game. If he did want to pursue that record, it would have to be the offensive lineman. I think A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith would have liked to be out there with him as well. So I think that the ripple effects it would have sent throughout the team was really the thing that he struggled with, and probably ultimately made the decision easier for Nick Sirianni, was to say that you don't want Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, guys who have dealt with injuries. Mekhi Becton has also dealt with injuries at points during the season. Obviously not major injuries necessarily for all those guys, but you don't want all of those guys going out there and risking injury in the regular season finale. I think that Saquon, again, expressed some relief. He said he was glad that Nick Sirianni was the one who had to make the decision, because he probably would have said, let's all go out there and get this record. I think that, the risk outweighed the reward from an organizational standpoint, which helped explain why they made the decision that they did. And yeah, I think that it's fair to say, like, while he wanted to go out there and pursue the record, he is glad that it wasn't in his hands because of the inherent risk that they would have taken to pursue it.
Mm-hmm. So now all eyes are on a deep playoff run, with Barkley not playing in today's game, trying to preserve not only his health, EJ, as you mentioned, but the health of the offensive line as well. You'll notice that on that inactives list was not Cam Jurgens or Mekhi Becton. So they are active. We are not expecting to see them play today, as we'll see the backups most likely start this game. But heaven forbid, from the Eagles' perspective, that any of the backups go down in this game as well. They would be there to step in a pinch. Now, listed as questionable going into today's game were Kenny Pickett, who's dealing with a ribs injury, Will Shipley, as you mentioned, DJ, who sustained a concussion against the Commanders, missed last week's game. Both of them are active. I'll say that I don't expect to see Pickett today, given the fact that he did not practice all week, as he continues to work through this ribs injury that he also sustained against the Commanders, played through it last week. Cumulative shots ultimately knocked him out in the third quarter, and Tanner McKee took over, expecting to see a healthy dose of Tanner McKee, most likely the start, and as well as Shipley too. I'm curious, EJ, what you think about this, because considering the fact that Shipley was off last week, didn't play, now he is active. He was practicing throughout the week, finished the week as a full participant in practice. Given how much the Eagles rely on Kenny Gainwell to spell Saquon Barkley during the season and how effective he has been, how much Shipley do you expect to see out on the field today?
Yeah, I think this is really going to have the complexion of a preseason game. So I think that you might see some Kenny Gainwell early on. I think that you might see, a rotation from some of the game, but probably by the second half, they are just going to probably try to get out of this game without any injuries to any of the main contributors, even the reserves, the key reserves. I think they're going to try to protect those guys. So I think that this is probably more of an opportunity for Will Shipley to show what he's capable of doing and within the framework of the offense. So if I had to guess, I'd probably guess Will Shipley. But yeah, I think you might see both of them at certain times. Obviously, there are only so many guys that they can rest. So, I think that'll probably be a rotation. But I think that probably by the second half, it's going to be the Will Shipley show for most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Another player who is active today and was activated from injured reserve yesterday is Dallas Goedert, who missed the last 4 games with a knee injury, his second stint sidelined this season, having missed 3 weeks earlier in the season, was not on injured reserve as he dealt with a hamstring injury at the time. Goddard is active and presumably available to play. We'll see if he gets some snaps, but EJ, I would expect to see him try to knock off some of the rust, I guess, at this point. Otherwise, why bring him back? Why activate him? The Eagles were under no obligation to bring him back this early in his 21-day practice window. Ultimately, they decided to activate him yesterday, and now he is available to play. How much of Goddard do you expect to see in this game? And I guess, do you agree with the decision to bring him back rather than just let him come back for the playoffs?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I was surprised to see him come off of IR before this game. I figured if they're going to play, or if they're going to rest most of their key guys and most of their starters, leave him on IR for another week and bring him back for the playoffs. But I think that they must have, valued the opportunity for him to get out there and just, like you said, knock the rust off. So that one probably will really look like a preseason game if I had to guess. He'll probably be out there for a series or two just to get his feet back under him, and then they'll probably have a quick hook for him. Maybe a little bit of this is to rotate the tight end group because of the fact that it's a thankless position, it's a physical position, and they've had obviously Grant Calcaterra in that role a lot this season. So maybe they felt like it was important to get Grant maybe a little bit of rest. But yeah, I honestly was surprised to see Dallas Goedert get that elevation for, I guess, activation for this game.
In addition to all of the moves and transactions that the Eagles made yesterday, they also elevated defensive end Chuck Harris and linebacker Dallas Gant from the practice squad, which I think sheds a little bit of light into some of the other players who are starters that, or at least substantial role players in the Eagles defense in particular, that may not play today. Especially when you look at the edge rushers group, not really expecting to see a Nolan Smith or Josh Sweat play, even though that they are active. And then in terms of the linebackers, we know that Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean are inactive, but perhaps they would try to spell someone like Oren Burks, who we know Dean is dealing with an abdomen injury. Speaking to him in the locker room earlier this week, he said that he's feeling good and that he honestly felt like he could have played last week against the Cowboys. He was held out, but ultimately wanted to rest up for the playoffs just to make sure that everything is good with his injury that he's nursing. So we'll see exactly how the snaps are distributed, but just know that those two players are active today. All right, let us transition into some of the big news and storylines going into today's game. I'll be honest, not a whole lot of actual storylines in today's game. We'll get into those in a moment. All eyes are already on next week and the playoffs. Eagles are the number 2 seed in the NFC, slated to play against the number 7 seed. Now, who is going to be the number 7 seed? That is the big question that will be answered in today's games. It could either be the Washington Commanders or the Green Bay Packers. Now, the Eagles have faced both of these teams. The Commanders, of course, are the common divisional foe, and the Eagles have split the series with them this season. You'll remember just a couple weeks ago, the Eagles had a pretty decent fight against the Commanders. Commanders ultimately ended up losing that game, but of course, that was the game that Jalen Hurts went down in the first quarter with a concussion, and then Kenny Pickett took over for him after that. And at the same time, kind of working through, he sustained a ribs injury and worked through that. His defense had 5 takeaways in that game, but yet they still had quite a few breakdowns in the secondary that ultimately led to their demise in that game. And then on the other side, there's the Green Bay Packers. The Eagles faced in Sao Paulo, Brazil, EJ, as you may remember, not too long ago. A win for the Eagles in that game. However, it has been many months since then. Teams tend to change and evolve as the season goes on. If you were the Eagles, EJ, and you had to pick, and of course the Eagles do not have this choice, which team would you rather face in the wild card round?
Yeah, it's a really tough question. Obviously the Commanders have just beaten the Eagles, and you kind of saw how that game could unfold. But I think it's fair to point out, like, Jalen Hurts was injured for most of that game, and it kind of was a weird game even after that. To see a defense force 5 turnovers and not figure out a way to win the game is really difficult. And that fourth quarter was really terrible for the Eagles defense. But if you look at it before that, I mean, I know you can't separate the two, but they were really dominant for the beginning part of that game. So I hear the argument. I actually had an argument with somebody on the way up to the press box today about whether the Eagles should want to see the Commanders or the Packers, and they were arguing that Jaden Daniels is just the X factor and that he's probably the reason why you don't want to see that Commanders team. I go the other way. I actually think that Jordan Love is the quarterback that I wouldn't want to see coming to Lincoln Financial Field if I were the Eagles. I mean, the Packers, they are 11-5 going into this regular season finale, just like the Commanders, but I feel like their 11-5 is built a little bit differently if you look at their opponents. They really have only lost to their NFC North opponents, whether that's the Vikings or the Detroit Lions, and then they obviously had the loss to the Eagles. Those are the only teams that the Packers have lost to going into this final week. I really feel like their strength of opponent, what they've been able to do for most of the season, really stands out. And then again, Jordan Love, we've seen him go into playoff games. Obviously, it was against the Cowboys last year. Maybe you'd argue the Cowboys are a little shakier than most other playoff teams, but still, we've seen Jordan Love play well in the playoffs and kind of be able to impact those high leverage, high stakes games. So yeah, I just feel like the Packers are much better than what you'd expect from a 7 seed. I really think that most years you would kind of expect to see that Giants team, that type of team from 2022. The Eagles just kind of rolled. It's going to be a tough slate no matter what. But yeah, I slightly lean toward the Commanders, wanting to see them. I struggled with it. I wrote about that earlier this week. The fact that the Packers cornerbacks, obviously Jair Alexander is out for the foreseeable future. That's a big hit for them. So I think the Eagles should be favored in either of those games. But yeah, I do. I slightly lean toward preferring, if I were the Eagles, I'd prefer to see the Commanders.
The fact that the NFC North is so strong this year, it's pretty mind-blowing to think that either the Vikings or the Lions will have to hit the road for these playoffs. It's a great division over there, and there's a very strong chance that the Eagles could face one of them in the Green Bay Packers in that wild card round. All right, let's actually talk about this game too. It may be a meaningless game in terms of the result of this game. However, it is not meaningless to the players that are ultimately going to play and have a chance to show what they have been working on, mostly behind the scenes to this point in the season. And there is no better example of the fact that this is really not a meaningless game than Tanner McKee. If you look at him and the work that he has put in over the last 2 years as the third string quarterback in the Eagles quarterback's room, he is expected to make his first career start, even though Kenny Pickett is active today, still nursing that ribs injury. He got his first regular season action last week against the Cowboys once Pickett came out of that game in the second half. And while he didn't have many dropbacks, he was very efficient on the passes that he did make. He went 3 of 4 for 54 yards and 2 touchdowns. When you look at what this game could potentially mean for Tanner McKee in the scheme of his career, his future, what would a strong performance mean either for his future with the Eagles or maybe even elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think he has some years in the NFL to earn, with these types of games and performances like he had last week. I feel like when the Eagles drafted him, it's usually like you're taking a flyer on a guy on day 3. You're hoping that maybe he can become a credible backup, somewhere in the NFL, or I guess the Eagles would hope for them, but. The Eagles do have a tendency to have like experienced backups, guys who have started in the league before. I think that for Tanner McKee to kind of secure that number 2 spot, he does need to have games like he had last week, and really in a bigger sample size. So I think that it's going to be really important to see him operate for the entire game, for the duration of the game. Obviously, he had the benefit of playing with all the starters last week, so I think that really did kind of it's in a way more informative and less informative. It's like what he might look like in a pinch coming into a game mid game, but I do think having the week to prepare and again having some regular season action will be really important for him. Like you mentioned it, maybe he does have trade value, or maybe this is kind of a window for them to move on from Kenny Pickett in the offseason for Tanner McKee. I think it just gives him optionality if he can prove that he is capable of being a number 2 quarterback, which I think he has sort of. I mean, he's on his way to proving that, I think. He has performed well enough to suggest that he might be there. And I think, again, it's just a matter of expanding the sample size for him at this point.
Mm-hmm. Unlike last week when McKee got to step in and play with the Eagles starting offense, today he is expected to step in, play with those second and third string players against a New York Giants defense and really a Giants team in general that has struggled mightily throughout the season. They are coming off of a pretty resounding victory over the Indianapolis Colts last week, and the offense was especially eye-catching. Drew Lock, who the Eagles know well after they lost to him last year when he was a member of the Seattle Seahawks, was kind of the tipping point for their late season collapse last year. 17 of 23 completions last week against the Colts for 309 yards and 4 touchdowns for a 155.3 passer rating. Nearly perfect. Malik Neighbors also had a stellar game, 7 receptions for a career high 171 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, listen, the Giants have nothing to play for today other than maybe a little bit of pride. They are well out of the playoffs with a 3-13 record. How much of an effort do you expect them to put up in today's game?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the way that they played last week certainly got, I think, everyone's attention. And Malik Neighbors does seem like the type of person who is wired to drag teams to wins, even if necessarily the organization might not want them to win these games. While they look ahead to draft order. So, I honestly feel like there's a chance that the Giants might be more feisty than we expect, but. On the flip side, it's like if this game even gets mildly lopsided, like this team is literally, this game is the only thing between this team's vacation schedule. So, I do wonder if the game starts to get lopsided one way or another, if they just sort of, throw in the towel and say, let's start thinking about, our flights to warmer places than Lincoln Financial Field is today. So, I could see this game going a lot of different ways, not to, spoil my prediction, but I do think that there is some quit potential from the Giants just because of the nature of where they are at in the season.
Before we get into our predictions, let's take some comments here from the readers. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts and opinions over on Inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day. Let's take this comment from Retired at 58. They say there are several Eagles who should make the Pro Bowl. What about Quinyon Mitchell and Jordan Mailata? They should be starters. If you were not aware, the initial Pro Bowl rosters were announced for this week, and 6 Eagles were named to it, including Saquon Barkley, Lane Johnson, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, Jalen Carter, and Zach Bond. The 3 of those players at the very end there, Jurgens, Carter, and Bond, being first-timers named to the Pro Bowl. Now, ultimately, none of the Eagles would like to be at the Pro Bowl in February. It would coincide with the Super Bowl week, or at least the weeks leading up to the Super Bowl. And ultimately, the Eagles would prefer to be there than the actual Pro Bowl itself. But still, to be named is an honor. And Jordan Mailata is, at the very least, an alternate for the Pro Bowl. Who do you feel like is the biggest snub that did not make the initial roster?
Yeah, I lean toward Mailata because of the fact that he has played at a Pro Bowl level, but it is hard to. I think he's just more of the victim of the NFC being really deep at offensive tackle. Obviously, are you going to take Lane Johnson off of that list? At some point, you just have to look at the guys who are ahead of him and just kind of tip your cap. Tristan Wirfs and Penei Sewell are both very good offensive tackles as well. I think that AJ Brown with Terry McLaurin over him is the one that I think also stands out. You had that's always my exercise, is you have to look at the roster and try and decipher who would come off. And I do think that AJ Brown just he doesn't necessarily have the numbers that he maybe would have had in years past. Obviously, he still has good stats, but I think if you just watch him play, it's hard to argue that there are 6 or even 3 receivers in the NFC that are better than him, 6 across the NFL that are better than him. So that would probably be my pick, was AJ Brown. Again, probably a victim of the Saquon Barkley historic season a little bit, just not having the opportunities to really have a dominant stat line to kind of back up what we've seen all year, which is that he is definitely one of the best receivers in the NFL.
Mm-hmm. All right, Retired at 58. Thank you for your comment. Let's take this one from Jonathan DT. They say some records aren't worth risking injury as it relates to Saquon Barkley and the pursuit of the single season rushing yards record. The Dickerson record, which has been around for decades, is worth the risk because it's unlikely to be broken again easily. That's an interesting take, EJ. What do you think about that one?
It is really significant how long that record has been standing, but I think it's been standing that long for a reason, and it's because it's very difficult to do. And I really don't have any gripe with Saquon Barkley not playing today. I think, obviously, as a reporter, it would have been, a cool storyline to follow and everything else. But I think in general, I think Saquon's feelings on it are pretty dead on for how I think he should feel. I guess I shouldn't be projecting any feelings on him, but I do. I think that I understand where he's coming from at the very least, in terms of it's disappointing that he didn't achieve it, but it would have been a little bit foolish to go out there and try to achieve it in a formality of a game like this one. So I think it's almost like if there were playoff seeding on the line, it would make more sense. But I think, again, one of the things that I did on in my research this week that really stood out to me is Saquon will probably still lead the NFL in touches this year. Kyron Williams is the only player that's anywhere near him at 374 touches. And Kyron Williams is also probably not playing this weekend. So, the fact that that he's had that many touches in that short amount of time, I think just the workload that he's had to endure, I don't think it would have been a good idea to bring him out here and just chase the numbers. I think it would have been a little bit against the spirit of the record in the first place. So yeah, I understand where Jonathan DT is coming. Honestly, I think that this debate has actually shown me that both sides, I can see both sides, I can understand both sides of the argument. I just fall on the one that's keep in mind the greater good of the team and the ultimate goal that they do have to make noise in the postseason.
Right. And I think it is the decision from Nick Sirianni is consistent with his messaging throughout the season of putting the team before the individual, that the individual accolades are not as important or as big as what the team can accomplish together. So if anything, it is at least consistent from Sirianni from a leadership standpoint. All right, let's get into these player picks, EJ. there's obviously a game being played today, and we've discussed the stakes somewhat, not very high still for some of these players, especially the depth players who could even potentially step into a bigger role next year or in the future. Who are you most interested in watching today?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the head. I'm going to go with Tyler Steen because I do think that he might have a bigger role next season or in years to come. Obviously, I feel like fans are sometimes down on Tyler Steen because he did lose that right guard competition to Landon Dickerson, to Mekhi Becton over training camp. I think the injury really impacted his ability to have that competition. So I feel as if I think that he has played well at times this season. He's had up and down moments coming in for in relief of whether it's Becton or Dickerson. But I feel like he still has a chance to earn a starting role here this year. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with Mekhi Becton this offseason. He could get a more lucrative contract to go start somewhere else, whether that's at guard or tackle. If the Eagles bring him back, I think it would make a lot of sense. But I do think that Tyler Steen, if he plays well today, could make a real case to have a starting role going into next season.
In a similar vein, I am curious to see whoever's going to be covering Malik Neighbors in today's game, whether that is Isaiah Rodgers or Keely Ringo. Rodgers' future is a little bit more muddy with the Eagles just because he's on a one-year deal. If the Eagles are pleased with his performance this year, would they consider bringing him back? I don't know. Keely Ringo, of course, is still on his rookie contract, so he's got at least a couple more years left on with the Eagles. And I think the big question really is around Darius Slay and his future after this season. He's under contract for one more year after this. However, he has no guaranteed salary on that final year, so perhaps there is some sort of an out there for the Eagles if they wanted to take it. We don't know. We really haven't received any indication either way. I know he has throughout the season kind of maybe hinted at that he's getting up there. He's 34 now, I believe. He just turned 34. So he is getting up there in terms of years as a cornerback. Could the Eagles replacement already be on the roster is the big question. And what would a solid performance against really at least one of the top receivers in the division, if not at least across the league and Neighbors, what would a solid performance from one of those cornerbacks really mean? I think that it could potentially go a long way. So again, if we're keeping an eye on the future of this Eagles team, I would say the two of them, I'm most intrigued to see how they perform today. All right, let us get into our predictions for a very difficult game to nail down exactly what's going to happen. But to do that, we are going to bring in our colleague, Jeff McLane. Jeff, it's good to see you. Before you get into today's matchup and your thoughts on the final score of today's game, I'm going to pose the same question that I posed to EJ earlier in our show. Again, Eagles don't have a choice in the matter, but if you are coming from the team's perspective, who would you rather your wild card round opponent be, the Packers or the Commanders?
Yeah, obviously, it's probably one of the main questions on the minds of the Eagles and their fans. Who they're going to play in the first round. We know it's obviously going to be either the Packers or the Commanders. EJ, I thought you did a very good job of mapping out in today's paper all of the teams that they could potentially place in the postseason. And I'm in agreement with you that I think it's the Packers more than the Commanders because they have more talent overall. If you look at the Commanders, though, I think they have a quarterback that's playing better, in my opinion. Jordan Love, as good as he's played this year, there are times when he can make some mistakes and hurt the team. The Packers, though, do have a balanced offense. They can ride on the shoulders of Josh Jacobs, who's been one of the best running backs in the NFL this season. So, I mean, that is, there's certainly some fear and having to face the Packers, a team that the Eagles beat comfortably not comfortably, but the beat in the season opener. It seems so long ago now. It'd be the first time they played the Packers in the playoffs since 2010 here at Lincoln Financial Field in the first round, a game that the Eagles had lost. I'm showing my age here, but they lost a close one. In fact, I recall seeing Michael Vick throw the pass to Riley Cooper in the back of the end zone, first down. Probably didn't need to go for it. It was intercepted, and the game ended. But David Akers actually missed a couple kicks in that game, and that's why they lost. And I bring that up because if you look at that first matchup between the Eagles and the Commanders, it was a close one. Washington scored late, probably made it closer than it was, and Jake Elliott had missed a couple kicks. The Eagles really broke it open in the fourth quarter. with a couple of Saquon Barkley runs, and Daniels didn't play as well as he had previously, but he had an injury at that point. He played much better, obviously, in the rematch. But as you noted in your story, EJ, that was a team, Eagles team, that was without Jalen Hurts. They lost C.J. Gardner-Johnson to an ejection. So, I think the Commanders do pose some threats, and there's no reason to think that they couldn't come here and win. It's possible, but I think you look at that roster overall, it just doesn't have the depth that the Packers have, certainly that the Eagles have. One last thing about the Commanders is that Dan Quinn has them playing very tough physical brand of football, has them believing in themselves. And that's a team that's always dangerous in the postseason. So that would be the one reason why I'd be wary of Washington. But the Packers, again, they just have more talent up and down the dial. Their defense is stronger than the Commanders. And that's probably, LaFleur's been there and done it before. So that's kind of why I agree with EJ here. And I'm sure maybe, Olivia, you feel the same way. The Packers are the team that I would want to avoid in the first round.
I do. Well, we'll have all of next week to dissect the matchups and everything that's going to occur once we finally have, we know who the opponent is going to be later today. But jumping back to today's game, Jeff, given all the, again, the backups likely starting and playing throughout the majority of this game for the Eagles, going up against a tough, a Giants team that has had a tough season, yet they are coming off of a win last week over the Indianapolis Colts. What is your final score of today's game?
Yeah, I'm looking at the flip card here, and I haven't started to cross out all the names that the Eagles have inactive and that I don't expect to play. So, I mean, it's really hard to pick the Eagles based upon that. Could they beat the Giants, a team that, is kind of one of the worst in the league? I mean, they showed something last year. Last week they put up 45 on a Colts team. They denied themselves a possible top pick in the draft by doing so. So there's no major reason to tank, I guess, this game. Maybe a few spots. If the Eagles if the shoe was flipped, I'm sure that the Eagles probably would find some way to lose it, as we saw from the 2020 season finale.
Yeah.
But anyway, all that being said, Tanner McKee showed something last week, but he's not going to have the guys up front blocking for him. He's not going to have the receivers that he typically would want to throw to if he was starting with first unit type players around him. And so I feel like it'll be tough for him to move the ball against a defense that still has some talent. I know Dexter Lawrence isn't in there, and he's the main guy you worry about. But I think I picked 23-17. I don't know, anything that gets us through this game and onto the playoffs as fast as possible is what I'm rooting for.
All right. Well, we'll tell the refs not to throw any flags. Nothing that delays the game anymore that it needs to be delayed. EJ, what is your final score for today's game?
Yeah, I went Giants 31-21. I thought about picking a tie just to kind of, call to attention how this game is. The scoreline doesn't really matter. I think the Eagles would be happy. I think the Eagles will view this as a win if they get out of this game without any injuries. So, yeah, Giants 31-21. Honestly, you could tell me it'd be any score, and I'd believe you.
Sure, why not? I'm going with the Giants as well, 24-21. I guess I have it a little bit closer and perhaps being a little bit of a lower scoring game from the Giants. I'm giving a little bit of the benefit of the doubt to the Eagles backups that have been solid, at least the ones that we have seen in relief of some of the starters throughout the season. So I'll give them that, but I'm still going to go with the Giants in this one, given the fact that they played pretty well last week against the Colts, and they aren't going down without a fight. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for us here over on Inquirer in live at Gameday Central. As always, make sure you're over on inquirer.com/Eagles Game Day throughout the game. Like I said earlier in our show, we will be interacting with you throughout the game, taking your questions and your comments, and we look forward to seeing you over there in just a little bit.
And please keep up with more Eagles coverage on my Uncovering the Birds podcast. New episodes will be released every week. Tuesday, most likely, will be again this week. Listen to wherever you get your podcasts or go to inquirer.com/podcasts.
Once again, that is all for today. Thank you so much for tuning into Gameday Central, and we will see you next time.